Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Brett Peterson. I'm the Director of Sales and Operations for North, Central, and South America. Thank you for joining us today. As a point of introduction, Isograph has been creating and improving engineering software for over 32 years. Our headquarters is in the UK, and we have an office here in beautiful Alpine, Utah. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. David Wiseman. He will be conducting our presentation today. He's our lead technical support, and he's been with Isograph over 13 years and worked with thousands of organizations helping their employees become conversant with our software tools. Now today, David will be giving a high-level overview of one of our software modules. Now, if you happen to find this training one interesting and you want additional content, and if you have any other pending questions, I wanted to give you our contact information here on the screen. Feel free to reach out at any time. So like I mentioned, David's going to be giving us an overview of the software tool, and the tool we'll be discussing today, our module, is our Hazop Plus. And Isograph offers a suite of products that you can select from, based on your needs. And so this is just one of our many tools that we offer. But with that being said, let me turn the time and share the screen with David Wiseman. Let me just pull this up here. And David, you should be seeing that come through momentarily. And we appreciate you spending your time with us today on our Hazop Plus module. All right, I can see your screen. I'll turn the time over to you, David. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. Thanks very much, Brett. So yes, today I'll be taking you through Isograph's Hazop Plus software. This is a scribing tool for noting the proceedings of your Hazop sessions. So, for example, you'll be able to build up lists of people taking part in the Hazop, develop risk ranking matrices, and build up the studies of the various different assets that you'll be looking at as part of your Hazop study. So you should now be able to see the Hazop Plus window on the screen. The Hazop Plus interface has been built to be as straightforward and user-friendly as possible, of course, and we've broken it down into different sheets, where each sheet of the interface performs a different function. So to begin with, when we start the software, we find ourselves on the setup sheet. Now, here is where you would enter the starting conditions for your Hazop. For example, you would tell the program what format your deviations will be defined in. Typically, this would be parameters and guide words, but you do have the option to select the deviations option, which would allow you to enter a description of each deviation as a short text string. So there are a variety of things you can set up here. I won't pick through all of them, but perhaps the most interesting of the things on this sheet is that it gives you the ability to create and set up custom fields on each of the other sheets in the interface. So, for example, if you are, let's say, setting up some personnel in your Hazop project, and you find that there is a certain bit of information that you want to include about each person on the Hazop, but you don't have a specific field for that information, you can add that to your project using the custom fields facility. Now, I will demonstrate that a little bit as we go along, but for the moment, I'll move along to the messaging sheet. Here is where you can optionally connect your Hazop Plus installation to your email exchange. The purpose of doing that is that as you're performing your Hazop and you're generating action sheets and Hazop reports, you may wish to fire those off to participants of the Hazop, maybe alerting them to changes to the Hazop, alerting them to actions that have been allocated to them. So you can sort of automate that process, set up a connection to your exchange, and then quickly and easily send off PDFs of your reports to different people who are participating in your Hazop study. Now, the next sheet is the summary sheet. So this is, of course, very simple. You can just set up some text information about your overall Hazop project, so description, location, any additional comments. We might use this as an example actually of where we could introduce custom fields. So let's say, for example, I wanted an additional field on this interface. It might be, say, it could be anything, it could be a date, could be a drop-down box or a simple text field. If I wanted to add that, I would go back to setup. I would go to the summary sheet in the custom fields interface. I'll select custom field number 1. So first of all, I'll make that visible. So that makes custom field number 1 visible on the summary sheet. I'll give that a name, maybe something very simple. I'll just call it custom. And then I can choose what type of field I want this to be. So you can see there, I've got things like date, number, text line. Maybe I'll use date as an example. I'll choose that to be a date field. So now I've created that custom field, and if I go to the summary sheet, now that field is present. That gives me just a standard kind of Windows calendar where I can select a date to pop into that field. So as I mentioned, this is just one example of a custom field you could add. It could be text fields, it could be drop-down boxes, any number of different things. That's the summary sheet where you can just add a simple text information about your Hazop. You'll notice at the top, though, there are a couple of fields here marked Company and Hazop Manager. These are special fields that we call personnel fields, and from here we can select companies and people who are participating in our project. So as an example here, we have the Hazop Manager. Now, this information is drawn from the personnel sheet. So if I switch to the personnel sheet, I can add a new company. And you might call that Isograph. You'll notice as I'm doing that, I get an auto-complete box popping up. The program is able to remember text strings that have been entered historically. So if you ever enter similar text again, it will bring up this auto-complete box, and you can say, okay, actually, this is where I want to enter. I can just click it without having to complete the string. So of course, I can enter address and contact information, and then beneath any company, I can add people. So you can add a person, and this might be me, for example. So you can see I've obviously done this before because my name is popping up as I'm doing it. And again, I can enter address information, contact details. The email, of course, is particularly useful because that's going to link back to the messaging service. So if the Hazop Manager wants to send me an action sheet, they'll have my contact details that the messaging system will be able to reference when it sends that message to me. So back on the summary sheet, I can say what company is running the Hazop. Say, okay, it's Isograph. I can say who is the Hazop Manager. I can select a member of the personnel. And personnel fields like this are also available as custom fields. So if you wanted additional personnel fields on this sheet, you could add those as well in the form of custom fields. So we've summarized our Hazop, and we've added some of the people and the companies involved. The session sheet allows you to set up sessions representing the Hazop meetings that are taking place. So as you're going along through your Hazop, each time you sit down with the colleagues and consultants and so on, you might add a new session to represent that meeting. So, I might call that session number 1. And I can say the time and date that took place. And then I can say location, which would be one of the companies. I can select the chairman and the secretary, again, all coming from the personnel sheet. And naturally, over time, you'll build up a list of sessions. And as we'll see, the studies that you generate in your Hazop will each be linked to a session. So you'll have session number 1, you'll have a list of studies that took place during that session, and so on. Now you do have also the option to include drawings. Drawings basically are exactly as the name suggests, they're pictures. They could be bitmap images or JPEG images. Usually they would be things like schematics. So a schematic of the system that you're studying might be a photograph even. So you can add drawings. and then you can just go and select the file that you want to attach to your project, and then that will be displayed in the interface here. That can also be linked to the systems that you'll be studying. I'll show an example of that later on when we pull up an example project. But you can create a system, link the drawing to it, so you can easily see, what this system is supposed to look like through a schematic or an image. Next, we have the deviation sheet. So obviously this is a very important aspect of Hazop, defining the deviations that you're going to be studying in the context of the various systems that you're looking at. So we said before we could define that in terms of just a deviation description, or as we're doing here, parameters and guide words. So as you can see, you can create a list of parameters and you can create a list of guide words that you plan to work with. But this is a good opportunity to show some of the library facilities that are available in the software. At the bottom, you can see it's possible to browse for an external library. This allows you to attach an existing Hazop project to your current project and basically copy information across, information like your parameters and guide words or personnel or whatever else. But we do also provide some standard libraries with the software. Of course, naturally, if I click on the standard library, that's going to give me a standard set of parameters and guide words, which I can select individually, or I can just select all, and from the library, copy those parameters. And I will do the same with the guide words as well. So you can see there's my parameters and there's my guide words. If I extend one of my parameters, you'll see the guide words are each listed underneath there as well, because for each parameter, it may be that not every guide word is appropriate. So in here, I can tell the program, okay, for temperature, maybe reverse, that doesn't really make sense, because there's that. So I might say lower temperature and higher temperature are really the only two guide words that make sense for temperature. So there you can see all the others are now grayed out, just leaving lower and higher behind. This, we'll see, becomes important as we're building up our study. So we define the deviations that we're going to be looking at in our system, but we haven't yet actually defined the system itself, the system and the assets within that system that we will be studying as part of our Hazop. So for this, I will go to the node sheet, and in here I can add a node, and that node is going to represent maybe my system. And beneath that node, I could add child nodes that represent subsystems or individual assets that we want to look at. So I just call that an asset. And as you can see, it's possible to attach a drawing. So you can attach a schematic or a picture to each node. So if you want to say display a schematic of an asset or a photograph of an asset or something, then you can do that through here, sort of linking it all together. And then for each node, you'll notice as well as the general tab, we have the parameters tab. And in here, I can say which parameters are appropriate to a given asset. So I might say, well, maybe viscosity isn't important, but maybe vibration is, maybe temperature is. So I can turn off anything that I don't think is relevant to a given asset. So I'll turn everything off except for vibration, temperature, and pressure. So now I've got a list of the parameters that are appropriate for that particular asset. Now the last thing we'll look at, the last thing we'll set up before beginning to build individual studies in our Hazop is the risk ranking matrices. So the risk ranking matrices will allow us to rank the deviations in an asset by various different parameters. The standards would be things like cost and safety severity and likelihood. But again, all of these things are customizable. So to give you an example, I can go to predefined matrices. I can add a predefined matrix, maybe a safety matrix. And here you can see that I've got the safety ranking already set up. It is likelihood versus severity. and the output is the safety ranking. Now, each of these is customizable. So I can use the standard fields, or I can use custom fields that, again, I can set up in my setup sheet. So those matrices are completely customizable right down to the individual parameters that you are selecting. I can edit the values. So here, for example, I've got likelihood, and I can have different likelihood ranks that I can add and remove and edit through this dialog. Same for severity as well. And for the output for the safety ranking, again, I can create a list of rankings and I can color code them. So I just use a standard Windows color palette to color code the various different rankings. So those are the inputs to the matrix. What does the matrix itself look like? Well, we can see that by going to the risk ranking matrix view. And in here, you can see we've got the standard matrix set up, remote to frequent for likelihood, minor to critical for severity, and then for each combination of those inputs, we can select what is the appropriate output value. So you can see here, I've got low for some of the lower combinations, whereas for the higher combinations, we have things like high and unacceptable. And we'll be able to reference that information as we're building our studies. So, okay, let's say we're a group of engineers. We're sitting down to our first Hazop session. We've set up our matrices, we've set up our nodes. Now we want to do a study. So we would go to the study sheet, and we're currently in session 1. And I can choose a node, choose a system or an asset that I want to study. So I might choose the asset number 2 down here. And so beneath that asset, I can look at the parameters that I want to study. And you can see only the parameters that I selected on the nodes sheet are visible. All the others are hidden. If I look at, say, temperature, let's say I want to study high temperature in this asset. I can extend the temperature parameter, and there I can see lower and higher, the 2 deviations, the 2 guide words that I said were appropriate for temperature. And again, all the others that I deselected on the deviations tab are hidden. So I can click on higher. And now in the grid, I have editable fields. So I can say, okay, what is the likelihood of high temperature in this asset? So I can click, maybe that's probable. Maybe the severity is moderate. And if I click away, that automatically assigns the relevant ranking. Now I'm only using one risk ranking here. The program will not limit basically the number of rankings you can have, or at least the limit is very, very high, because you could see the number of different custom fields you can have. So you're not limited here to just having one ranking matrix. You could have 2 or 3 or more, and you could do rankings for all of them here in the study. But we've ranked the deviation for this asset. We said it's medium safety ranking. Now we can define the causes, consequences, and safeguards. Now these things can be defined individually on the analysis sheet. So I could, in fact, create a list of pre-existing causes, consequences, and safeguards on this analysis sheet. You can see the buttons here for adding those things. However, I can also add them through the study interface as well. So I can double click the causes field, add a cause, put the cursor in the field, and I can either type in the name of the cause I want to create, or if there are already causes defined on the analysis sheet, filter and select from this dialog that pops up. So I'm just going to enter a very simple description, just cause 1, and close, and that cause is added. If I go to the analysis sheet, I find that cause is also added here as well, and the program will list the studies to which this cause has been attached. So that makes things easier when you want to kind of organize things by a given value. So if you want to look at all the studies associated with one cause or one safeguard, this is a good place to look. So let's go back, and I'll just demonstrate the fact that for a given deviation, it is possible to have more than one cause. So I can actually double click in here again, add another cause, maybe this problem is also potentially caused by cause 2. So I've got 2 causes against the same deviation. So I've got 2 causes against the same deviation. I can add consequences in much the same way. So I'll just call that consequence 1 and close. And of course, safeguards, again, we can enter in exactly the same way. And you can have multiple consequences and multiple safeguards per study. So we can also naturally allocate actions to a study. So for a given deviation, we can say, okay, this is what we're going to do about it. So I can click in the action box and add a new action. And here I can add actions in the same way as I was adding consequences and causes. Actions can also be defined through the action sheet, which we'll take a look at shortly. I'll just call that action 1. And then I will maybe select a person, allocate this action to maybe to myself. So I can say, who is the responsible person? I can even say, what's the priority on that action? So I click close and that action is added. And again, I can have multiple actions per study. If we go over to the action sheet, you'll see that action has been added. So there's the action, and I can extend where it says causes. I can see the causes associated with that action. And of course, I can see the study records attached to that action as well. It's even possible to set up individual tasks for an action. So let's say an action was, install an alarm. That action might be made up of individual tasks. So, researching what alarms are available, doing a price comparison, and then selecting an alarm to purchase, purchasing the alarm, installing the alarm. You can break down the action into the various tasks that make it up. And those individual tasks, if we add one, you can see we can allocate a responsible person, and we can specify what the current status is of that task. So one of the things that I haven't mentioned, and is probably worth bringing up, as you can see here, there are a lot of settings that potentially go into building your Hazop project. Things like the personnel, things like the matrices, things like the custom fields. And you may find that across all of your Hazop projects, many of these things are common. So you might always have the same risk matrices. You may always have the same deviations that you look at. And you don't want, every time you start a new project to have to enter all this information all over again. So one of the things the program will let you do is save a project as a template file. So you can save a template project. So when you start a new project, instead of building it from scratch, you can build it starting from the template. So you can open up the program, build a project from a template. So you can see here, new project from template, and then you can select which parts of that template you wish to copy into your new project, whether that's the matrices or the deviations or whatever else it is you need. So now I'm going to open a project. So maybe I will open just a very straightforward example. So here I have a simple project. There's a company involved, the manager, descriptive information on the summary. I have a list of the companies and the people who are involved, the sessions in which the people took part. And you can see, again, another thing I didn't mention earlier, when you create a session, it is possible to add participants. You can essentially take a register. At each session, you will have a list of the people who took part, so you'll know who was present and who wasn't, who knows what happened, who might need updating about the proceedings of the last session. We have drawings. So you can see if I select the drawing here, there's a schematic displayed, and I can see a list of the different nodes to which that study has been allocated. And beneath that, beneath each node, I can see the different studies that have been performed against that node, against that asset or system. I've got the deviations in the form of parameters and guide words, a list of the nodes, parameters and guide words associated with them. I've got a risk ranking matrix. This is another example of a standard matrix. This is our cost matrix. So you can see there, this one's set up for likelihood versus cost severity. And if we have a look at our studies, you can see, if I select a given asset or system, I can filter the studies that are displayed on the right-hand side. And of course, all the causes and consequences, actions, and so on will be listed on the relevant sheets as well. So a very important aspect of Hazop, of course, is reporting, generating those task sheets, those action sheets for the participants, coming up with reports about your studies, all that good information that comes out of Hazop. And Hazop Plus has an integrated reporting facility that will let you pull out that information. So let me show you an example of a report. So I'll go to File, and I will go to Print Preview, and maybe we'll look at study records by session. So that is now just pulling up the report. That's populating it with data. So here you can see the program is outputting a report showing my different studies broken down by session, by asset, and so on. I can cycle through those pages and see the various different studies displayed. Now, all of these reports are customizable through the design mode. So you can modify the reports that are provided with the software, but you can also create your own reports as well. And naturally, reports can be printed. They can be published to Microsoft Word or to PDF. And obviously, because this is essentially a text report, a table of data, that can be exported into text files, things like CSV that you could open in a text editor or even in Microsoft Excel. So this functions as an Excel export as well. So that is an overview of Isograph's Hazop Plus software tool. Brett, do you have any questions about that or anything else you think we should take a look at?
No, I appreciate it. You did a great job. I really appreciate the overview. What I'd like to put up on my screen here, if you can see this here, I wanted to add, if you have not already done so, you can download a free demo of our software and at that URL there. And any questions you have, reach out to us so that we can help out and help you continue with your success on the Hazop tool. We appreciate it, David. Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for attending today. And I hope you have a great remainder of your day. Thank you.